Okay, welcome to an Evolving Man podcast, episode number 125 with Dr. Bradley Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a veteran holistic physician and author of the best-selling book, The Emotion Code. Dr. Brad has trained and certified more than 12,000 emotion code practitioners in 80 countries, teaching them how to identify and release trapped emotions, unresolved feelings from traumatic and difficult experiences that harm health and relationships. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Piers. Great to be here.
Thank you. So, how I'd love to begin the podcast, how I generally begin the podcast, is asking you a bit about your journey. How did you get into writing the emotion code, getting into the work around emotion?
Well, um, it's been a very interesting journey for me. It really began when I was 7 years old, and I was really sick with the measles. And I had overheard my parents talking, and I knew that the plan was that I was going into the hospital the next day, and that I was going into something called an oxygen tent. And I didn't know what an oxygen tent was, but I knew that I was really sick. And my parents had made a bed for me on the couch in the living room so I could be near their bedroom. And on this particular night, everyone else had gone to bed. And I remember this like it happened yesterday. My parents came into the room, and my mother said to my father, she said, honey, will you kneel down with me and say a prayer for our boys who will be able to get well? And so they did. Now, knowing my dad's was probably the first time I'd heard my dad pray, but my dad starts praying. Just it wasn't any kind of a memorized prayer or anything. It was actually just talking to God, asking God to help me because I was, quite sick. So I'm lying there feeling really nauseated and feverish and just really ill. And in the middle of this short, heartfelt prayer, a miraculous thing happened. This change began at the top of my head, and it went whoosh through my body, and I was instantaneously, completely healed. And I was suddenly just bursting with excitement to tell them that I was better. And I waited till my dad was done praying, which didn't take long. And then I told him I was better. And they just didn't really, they said, okay, that's fine, go back to sleep. The next day proved it that I was better, never did end up going into the hospital. And that taught me two really powerful things, Pierce. It taught me that there's a higher power we can draw upon, number one. And number two, healing doesn't have to take a long time. It can happen instantaneously. And I've talked to other people that have had an instantaneous healing like that. And if something like that happens to you in your life, uh, it's a it's definitely a watermark on your life. You can't forget it. That event is burned into every particle of my being. So that was at age 7. So at about age 13, I ended up having these pains in my back that at first I was able to ignore, but then pretty quickly they reached this uh, just unbelievable crescendo where I would get pain out of the blue that would take my breath away or knock me to the ground. I mean, it was very scary and obviously not normal. My parents were very worried, took me to the hospital. And in the hospital, they ran tests, and my parents were told I had kidney disease. And years later, my mother told me that they had been told that I had about a 50-50 chance of surviving this, but there was nothing that they could do for me medically. And so their advice to me was to not run around or, jostle my kidneys. They didn't even need to tell me that because, I mean, I was walking on eggshells already. So my parents took me to see some alternative doctors, some holistic doctors that practice out on the edge of town. This was in Great Falls, Montana, where I grew up. And these doctors practice in a trailer house, okay, or I think you guys call them a caravan, maybe,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
right, out on the edge of town in a wheat field. And I can remember scraping the mud off my shoes trying to get into this place. And uh, and yet, when they started working on me, I could feel my body responding, and I could feel my pain becoming immediately less and less frequent and less severe. So within about 3 weeks, I was taken back to the hospital to have all the tests rerun, and all the tests were negative. And I knew that these people had helped me, and it was an interesting contrast for me because the big expensive medical clinic where all the money was, where I'd been tested and diagnosed. And they did a great job diagnosing me, but they couldn't really help me. But these other people did. So I decided this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a doctor. And if I need to practice, in a caravan out on the edge of town in a muddy wheat field, that's okay. Because to me, that seemed to be the natural habitat of doctors that got results. So that's kind of how that went. And so that was my dream for quite a few years. But it was interesting because when I would lie on my back on their treatment table and they would be working on me, I can remember very distinctly looking up at them and saying, when I grow up, I want to do what you guys do. And they were very discouraging. They would say, no, you don't. No, you don't. Because if you go to chiropractic school or a school of naturopathy or something, they said, you'll come out of that with so many fixed ideas. And they said, you won't even be able to think for yourself. You'd be like a zombie. That's what they said. So I really took that to heart. I'm 13 years old. So these people had saved my life. I totally believed them. And so then in 1980, I took a class on computer programming. I needed one more class to round out my schedule at college. And I took this class. I wasn't really interested, but I was a little, maybe slightly curious. And suddenly I found out that I was actually a nerd, right? And that I was absolutely head over heels in love with computers. And so back in the early 80s, I had a business called the Computer Tutor,
Right.
and which I thought was really quite clever. And I would go into people's businesses, and these are people who had purchased a new IBM PC, but there was no software. So I would go in and write this, very simple software that would enable them to get some use out of this machine. And so I loved doing that. It was really fun and got to meet a lot of people and learn how businesses worked. And it was fascinating. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And then I had this experience where it was in the winter of 1984, and I was about 6 months away from going into the master's program at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and studying business and computers and information systems and so on. And we went home to Montana, my wife and I, and we had a little girl, and we're sitting around the fire with them. And my father, out of the blue, asks me this question. He said, "Are you sure that you don't want to go to chiropractic school? Because it seems like a great career, and that's what you've always wanted to do." And I said, "Well, no, I'm going this other direction." And he said, "Well, why don't you think about it one more time?" And so, I trusted my dad, and so I said, "Well, all right, I will." And so my wife and I made up a pro and con list, of getting my master's in business and going to work for some big company, or um, going into chiropractic school and then having my own private practice. And the list was pretty long on both sides. But having learned that there's a higher power, I mean, it was weird because I felt like I had my career all lined out. And now, because of this question my father had asked me, I feel like I'm back in the middle of the fence now, and I'm not sure which way to go again. And both these futures look pretty compelling, as a young man, and I had my whole future ahead of me. And now I've got a choice to make. So that night I got on my knees and prayed and asked God to help me to know which way to go. And that night I was awakened 3 different times, woke up 3 different times. And each time that I woke up, my mind would be full of all these thoughts of how great it is to be able to help people naturally and heal people naturally and serve people. And I would counter with something like, well, that's true, but the new IBM PC has a 4 megahertz processor or something. Being a total nerd. So every time, each time that I was awakened, those 3 times, I would counter with something. And so it was kind of like this tug of war going on in my mind. So I wake up the next day, I still don't know what to do. The next night, I'm asking again. And on the second night, I was awakened 3 more times. But this night, the experiences were exponentially more powerful than the time before. So that on the third time that I was awakened on the second night, uh, the thoughts of feelings of service to mankind and humanity and the whole entire world was absolutely overwhelming.
Mm.
And at that moment, I heard a voice that spoke to me very clearly, and it said, "This is a sacred calling." And I thought, okay, um, I'm in. I get it, and I'm in. I didn't really know what that meant. I thought, okay, I'm going to become a chiropractor, and that's a sacred calling, and it is. I think that anytime, because the body itself, I believe, and I've actually had an experience where I know the body itself is actually a temple, and so I used to think of myself as like a temple repairman, as a chiropractor, a holistic doctor. People would come in, their temple wouldn't be working right. I would try to figure out what was wrong with it, right? Um, and so I went to school, and I remember, well, I I partly put myself through school by working on the admissions office computers at the school that I attended, right? So I was kind of keeping my hand in. And one day in neurology class, our instructor is up at the board and he's talking about how the brain is a computer. And I remember thinking, wow, the brain, I guess it is a computer. And I thought to myself, I wonder if we'll ever have the technology to access the information that's in the brain, because the brain must know. And as a doctor, I mean, imagine if you could, kind of like if you take your car in and they plug it into a
Mm.
machine that tells them what's going on. Imagine if we could do that with the brain, because the brain must know what's going on with people. It's so smart, it's a computer. And I thought, I wonder if we'll ever have the technology to be able to hack into that computer or open a back door and be able to get information, because it would be such an amazing way to help our patients, right? And I thought, well, maybe in 200 or 300 years we'll have that technology, right? Probably won't happen during my lifetime. Little did I know
Mhm.
that's exactly what I was going to be spending my whole career on. And so I had a lot of interesting experiences when I was in practice, but prayer was a part of that all the way through, um, because I figured, God had gotten me into this, and so when I would go to work on someone, I would ask for help, because I thought, I need the help. Uh, I remember the very first patient that I saw up here was a guy that weighed about 300 pounds. I don't know how many stone that is, but maybe 20 stone or 30. I don't know. Anyway, and huge guy, and he's weeping,
Mhm.
literally weeping, because he's in so much pain with his back. And this is my first patient after I got out of school. And I remember, just feeling totally green and thinking to myself, how do I know what this guy really needs? How do I know what to do to really truly help him? And I wasn't sure where to begin. So, having learned you can get help, I just said a silent prayer, and that was the first of really untold numbers of silent prayers that I asked over about 18 years in my regular practice. And I'll tell you something, this was just a momentary pause. None of my patients ever knew that I was asking for help from them or for them. Um, it was just a momentary pause. And for me, it was just silently saying, Father in heaven, thanks for this opportunity to try to help this person. Please help me to know what to do. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. As a Christian, I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you something. Over all those years, there were times when, in response to that silent ask, information would suddenly just flood in like an avalanche of understanding and how to help this person. This especially happened when I was faced with something I didn't really know how to deal with. I didn't know how to help this person, or there was something that I needed to learn. And um, sometimes it was information about how to look at things in a way that I had never even imagined, and that I think nobody else had ever imagined either. And so as time went on, one of the biggest things that I learned was that we all have emotional energies that become trapped in the body. And so what I learned is that when we experience an emotion, it's a very important thing. I mean, first of all, life consists of emotions.
Mhm.
If you think of your life as being, think of your whole life as being like a tapestry on a wall in a castle, from the beginning where you're born till the end where you die, it's actually the emotions in your life that you experience that give that tapestry its color. Without the emotions, without the emotional highs and the emotional lows, it would be a gray scale tapestry, right?
Mhm.
I mean, life, I think, really wouldn't be worth living if we didn't have emotions. They're such an important part of our lives that we often really don't think about. We know we don't like to experience negative emotions. But, the reality of it is that the negative emotions are there, they're important, and the positive ones are too. So when we experience an emotion, we go through what I call the emotional loop, which is just the emotional experience. So when you begin, something happens, let's say, some stimulus occurs. Uh, Someone says something to you, something happens to you, something happens to someone else, you see something, read something, whatever it is, and you begin to feel a certain emotion. And you've started into the first stage of the emotional loop, okay? And when that emotion starts to come up for you, it's a natural thing. And you might feel certain feelings that go along with that emotion. You might have certain thoughts that come to you. You might have even certain physical sensations. The vast majority of the time, Piers, excuse me, what we do is we acknowledge that emotion and we allow that emotion to dissipate its energy, and the loop is closed on that emotional experience. And now that experience is over, and we're ready for the next emotion. But sometimes some emotions are just overwhelmingly powerful, and the loop never quite closes.
Mhm.
And that energy then is suspended in the body. And we call that a trapped emotion because that experience wasn't really allowed to complete. And sometimes an emotion comes up for us that we don't want to experience. And so we bury that emotion. We stop the process of that loop. And that also results in emotional energy now being suspended in the body. Sometimes, too, what happens is something that's something that's maybe not overwhelming happens to you. You feel some emotion, and you consciously decide that you're going to enhance that emotion and make it more powerful than it otherwise would be. So rather than being more of an observer of the emotion, you artificially enhance the emotion. You know, making a mountain out of a molehill, right? Is a saying. I don't know
Yeah,
if you have that saying over there, but
we do.
probably it's
Yes.
probably where it came from.
Yeah.
And so in that case too, it will result in an open loop. Okay. So what I found in practice was so fascinating because, first of all, I began to understand that the subconscious mind in every single one of my patients uh, was a computer, but it was a far more powerful computer than any computer that I had ever worked on. And I found that I could ask questions and I could get answers back from the subconscious mind as long as the answers were returned in the form of a yes or a no. And and I'm not the original one to to figure this out, but so for example, muscle testing was developed back in the 1960s by a guy named Dr. George Goodhart, and uh, and any of your listeners can try this. Grab another person, have them hold their arm out parallel to the floor, and then have them make a true statement.
Mhm.
Like, for example, my name is Brad. If I say, my name is Brad, and if you were to press down on the end of my arm, I'd be able to resist you because that's a true statement, congruent. If I were to say something untrue, like, my name is Bob, if you were to press down on my arm would weaken. And that's the binary nature of the interface, really, of this internal computer. It's kind of like having a conversation with a person who can only blink for yes or no, right? Blink once for yes, maybe blink twice for no. Um, could you have a conversation with a person like that? Well, yeah, you could. It wouldn't be like a regular conversation with a regular person because they can only give you a yes or a no, but you could still ask questions and get answers and have a conversation. And that's how the conversation goes with the subconscious mind within each one of us. It's binary, and so it can give you strength or weakness for yes or no. That's one of the easiest ways to get answers. Um, so one of the things that I found was that all my patients, no matter how young or old they were, had something in common. It didn't matter what they'd been diagnosed with. What they had in common was this emotional energy, this emotional baggage, trapped
Mm.
emotions in their bodies that were interfering with their ability to really create the life that they wanted. And they were causing physical symptoms in many cases for people. One of the very first cases that I saw was a woman that came in to see me. I'd seen her before, but probably been a few months. And one day she shows up at the office and she thinks she's having a heart attack. And she's got crushing chest pain, difficulty breathing, the left side of her face totally numb, her left arm totally numb. Well, these are all classic heart attack symptoms, right? Well, luckily, we were very close to a medical center and we could get medical help immediately. And I told my staff, look, give me 1 minute with her, but be ready to call an ambulance. And so I brought her into a treatment room and started doing some testing on her, asking questions, yeses and nos, getting answers. And right away, what I found was that she had a trapped emotion of grief.
Mm.
And this emotion of grief um, had actually begun 3 years before. And that's what her subconscious mind, her internal computer told me through muscle testing. And this took maybe, 30 seconds to arrive at. And when I landed on 3 years before with an emotion of grief, all of a sudden she bursts into tears. And she says, I can't believe that's affecting me. I thought I dealt with all that. And I said, well, what in the world happened to you? And she
Mm.
said that 3 years before, she found out that her husband had been having an affair for some period of time. And she confronted him with the evidence. And the marriage blew up. And that was really the beginning of the end. And then she got divorced. And she had spent about a year in therapy trying to deal with it and trying to move on. And having something like that happen is like it's like having a death. It is a death. It's the death of a relationship, right? Because
Mm.
and she was really deeply in love with that guy and thought she was going to be with him forever. And now suddenly it's over. And so she cried buckets of tears and spent a year in therapy trying to deal with it. And she had moved on. As far as she was concerned, that guy was just her ex, and he was the jerk that betrayed her. But as far as her body was concerned, that huge open loop of grief, that
Mm.
energy, that unexpressed, unprocessed grief was still there. And so when I released that emotional energy, which is very simple, if you're working on yourself, you can just swipe a few times with your hand or a magnet over the
Mm.
governing meridian. On someone else, you just go down the middle of their back a few times. As soon as I did that, immediately, within about 3 seconds, the feeling came back into her arm and into her face. The chest pain's gone. The difficulty breathing is gone. I mean, suddenly it's like it's all just been lifted from her. And she left the office about 10 minutes later after talking with me and my staff and just feeling wonderful and can't wipe the smile off of her face, right? And after she left, I remember sitting down at my desk in my office and my head was spinning. And I was thinking, how in the world, what did I just witness? How in the world could an emotional energy like that or an emotion create physical symptoms to that degree? I mean, she would have ended up in the hospital, and she would have, I think, been one of those people that would have run tests because it sure looked like a heart attack. But I think they would have come back and they would have said, well, all the tests are negative, so you weren't having a heart attack. We now know that there's something called cardiac syndrome. And in Japan, they discovered this. They called it Takotsubo syndrome,
Mhm.
where women, especially over the age of 55, when they have some kind of intense emotional event happen, it can happen to men too, but mostly women, the heart will actually go into this heart failure where the heart on an x-ray looks pretty much exactly like a Japanese fisherman's jar that they call a takatsubo. It's a jar that they put on the bottom of the ocean to collect octopus. It's a perfect home for the octopus. And so then, they end up as sushi. But I think that eventually she probably would have died of heart failure because the symptoms were so intense. She's still alive. She has a horse ranch in Oregon. That was probably 30, I don't even know how many years, 30 some years ago.
Wow.
And she's never had another problem, see.
Mhm.
So and really that really brings us to the heart because the ancients believed that the heart was the seat of the soul and the source of love and creativity and romance. And they believed that the heart was the core of our being, right?
Mhm.
Where'd they get those ideas? Well, if someone's really hurting you or you're really deeply grieved, there's a physical sensation that you feel. And
Mhm.
you've been through that recently, right?
Mhm.
And so you can relate to that feeling, right?
Yeah.
And I think the vast majority of us at some point in life have had that feeling that we might call heartache, where we feel like our heart is going to break. Well, why do we feel that? Because the heart really, we're beginning to understand now, is everything the ancients believed it to be. It really is the seat of the soul and the source of love and creativity and romance and everything else. And those ideas go back, I mean, time out of mind.
Mhm.
Ancient cultures all believe that about the heart.
Mhm.
And those ancient ideas come down to us today through time, mainly in the form of heart-shaped valentines,
Yeah.
right? Someone gives you a heart-shaped box of chocolates, but if you look up the heart in any Western biology textbook, or you talk to almost any doctor, they'll tell you that the heart is just a muscle. It just pumps blood. That's all it does. But back in the 1970s, they discovered that the heart actually has a lot of gray matter and white matter in it. They
Mhm.
call it the little brain in the heart. And when doctors first started doing heart transplants, it didn't take long before patients would come back sometimes with strange stories about how they now had new, completely different tastes in food or sports. Sometimes they would have memories of being in places that in their life they had never ever visited.
Mhm.
And in every case that I've ever read where they connected this person with the family of the heart donor, they would find out, well, yes, our son was a baseball player, and maybe that's why now you know can't miss a game. He never missed a game. So that's interesting. And you never cared for baseball before. Or they'd say something like, well, yes, our daughter loved Rome. It was her favorite city in the whole world. And she visited every chance she could get. And now you have memories of being in Rome, but you say you've never, ever in your whole life ever visited there. So those somehow must be her memories. How is that even possible? Well, we
Mhm.
don't know exactly. We think it's a quantum phenomenon, really. But I had an experience in 1998. My wife and I went to a conference on magnetic healing held in the Pacific Northwest, and I was one of the speakers on this program. And I was back in practice then. And she wakes me up early on the morning of this conference, and she tells me that she's had a dream. And as I'm trying to help her decipher her dream, I have what I can only call a, a waking vision, where the hotel room that we're in suddenly is no longer there. And instead, I'm seeing this unbelievably beautiful hardwood floor stretching out in front of me. And this was very high definition, 3D. I mean, I'd never had anything like that happen, a vision type thing. I'm not one of those people that really sees things, but I saw that and it lasted for several minutes. It was very strange. And at the same time that I'm seeing this floor, I have this understanding that comes into my mind that my wife's heart is underneath this floor. Talk about strange, right? Talk about bizarre. This is one of those bizarre things that I've ever experienced. And I told my wife what I was seeing and understanding to see if she knew what was going on. She had no idea. So we said a prayer and asked God to help us understand what we were being shown. And so knowing that this was something to do with my wife's dream, I had her hold out her arm and I started talking to her internal computer and asking questions, yeses and nos. And what I found was um, she had put up a wall around her heart. That's what the floor was. The This wall was symbolically made of hardwood floor material. She grew up in a house where her father had put in the hardwood floors in this house. And so when she was around 2 years old, her subconscious mind felt that her heart was going to be broken. Her father happened to be a rageaholic, very, very volatile, very dysfunctional family. And at around 2 years old, her subconscious decided if we don't put up some kind of a wall to protect our heart, it's going to be totally broken. And so she began building up these layers of emotional energy, right? Layers of trapped emotional energies around her heart, open loop energy around her heart. And then there were other, difficult things that happened to her as time went on. And so the price that she paid for having this wall all those years was that it was difficult for her to really connect with other people, difficult for her to give and receive love. It was difficult for her to really feel like she belonged in any group that she was ever with, even women that she'd known all of her life. She felt like she was kind of expendable, like she was the odd person out, like she didn't really fit in and didn't really belong anywhere. And so we asked if we could remove these layers, and the answer was yes. And so we would muscle test her and ask about a particular layer, and we would find out, oftentimes some event that had happened in her life. And she had her best friend once was killed, and she had an experience where that friend was hit by a car and killed in front of her. That there were several about that, and so on. And then she had a couple sisters that were raped, and there were emotions about that. And so it took about 2 weeks actually to remove all these layers. Finally, when the last one was released, suddenly for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. And the depression and the anxiety and all those feelings began to lift from her, changed her life. Um, so you see, what happens to us is that when we experience these difficult emotions, it doesn't matter what age we are, it doesn't matter how young or how old we are, we can end up developing a wall. And then that wall and other emotions as well have a very powerful influence over us. In fact, let me tell you one more story. This is about a 9-year-old boy that was brought in to see us. His mother told us the story. She said that the first thing that she noticed was she'd go into his room at night sometimes and he'd be on the floor. And she'd say, "What are you doing on the floor?" And he'd say, "I don't deserve to be in a bed." And she thought, "What? That's so strange. Why would he say that?" And then she found that if he did his homework, he wouldn't turn it in, or he just wouldn't do his homework because he's only 9 years old, right? And then she it was interesting because he had kind of like a fake sort of a grin pasted on all the time. He was trying to be happy. He thought he should be happy, but he really wasn't. And so she took him to see a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and she was told that he was diagnosed as being severely clinically depressed, but she was told that there wasn't anything they could do for him because he wouldn't admit that he was depressed. Well, he's only 9 years old, so she doesn't know what to do. She goes to the school one day to pay a surprise visit, only to find his teacher berating him for being pathetic because she can't get anything out of him. He's kind of non-functional, but he's so severely depressed. He's got this grin pasted on because he knows he should be happy, but he wasn't. And so she takes him out of school and she tries to do homeschool. That's not working either. And so she heard about this work that we were doing with the heart wall and the emotion code. So she brings him in and we tested him. And it doesn't matter how young or old a person is, you can muscle test. And I think we were probably testing through his mother, and asking him, directing questions at him, and then her arm would be strong for yes or weak for no, and she's holding his hand, and that's kind of how that works. And we found out, sure enough, that he had a heart wall. So we started working on him and asking questions, and we found out that there were several emotions wrapped around his heart, and one of the emotions had to do with a death in the family, a cousin it was a hayride, and he fell off the hay wagon, was run over by the tractor and killed. I mean, it's a horrific accident. Another accident was where a couple of other cousins were killed in a car crash. That developed another layer of emotion around his heart. And then we got to the very last emotion, the one that had begun this whole process. And what had happened was he was with his family. They were at a lake for a family reunion. And his sister was 12 years old, and she was his babysitter. She was also babysitting a little, and he was 5 years old at the time. She was also babysitting this little 5-year-old cousin, okay? His little best friend, okay? And they were out on a dock at this reunion. There was no adult supervision around, and she was trying to teach this little cousin how to swim. And he disappeared under the dock. And probably 45 minutes later, the divers retrieved his body from under the dock. And of course, he was long dead and blue. And this little boy was there. And he's witnessing this whole thing, the overwhelming, unbearable guilt that his sister was consumed with became absorbed into his body and immediately formed into this wall of energy around his heart, a heart wall. And that was the beginning of his heart wall. Because otherwise, I mean, he just lost his best friend, and his poor sister having such a horrific thing happen on her watch, her fault, was just unbearable. And so that was the beginning of this wall. So we released that emotion and then tested. There was no more heart wall. And so his mom took him home. For the next couple of days, he was just kind of lying around, lethargic. And she was thinking, well, it doesn't look like that helped either. But then on the morning of the third day, after we worked on him, he got himself up early, got his lunchbox and his backpack, and came downstairs and he said, Mom, I can go back to school now. I'm a happy pappy. That's an actual quote. And he did go back to school. And he went into the program for advanced kids because he was so smart and doing so well. And his mother told us, and by the way, that little boy now is probably 35 years old. Wow. And I believe he's got kids of his own. And yeah, but his mother at the time told us, she said, you know, he's completely over all of that now and is doing so well. And she said, if I hadn't been open to something so different, she said, I really believe my son would not have survived. You know, suicide is such a it's such a large cause of death, you know, for kids, teenagers, and I'll tell you something. This particular phenomenon of the heart wall, if you have gone through abuse, if you were in a boarding school, I can pretty much guarantee you've got a heart wall. 93% of people have put up a heart wall anyway, right? But if you've gone through some kind of systematic abuse or grief or difficulty as a child, if you've been through a divorce, it's just so common. And taking down that wall can make all the difference in the world. You know, we have over 10,000 testimonials now from people all over the world who have experienced this kind of thing where that emotional energy is released, and all of a sudden things shift for them. It's all about manifesting the the perfect you, I think, that is really inside of you, that's in your heart. But when your heart is surrounded by layers of grief and anger and depression and sorrow and sadness and frustration and so on, it becomes much more difficult for you to manifest into the world
Mm,
that perfect blueprint. And so people tell us when the wall is taken down, um, they suddenly find that they know what it feels like to love, or they know what joy feels like.
mm,
Many times people have told us that for the first time in their life, when that heart wall is taken down, they can actually feel the love of the creator for
mm,
them, which is so powerful. And people often fall in love who never thought they would. In fact, the classic story of this is a woman that came in to see me many years ago. And she came in because she had, rather severe neck pain that she'd seen a couple of other doctors for, and they didn't, weren't able to help her. So she came in to see me. And as we're talking, she tells me that she's 38 years old. She's a nurse. She's single, has not dated in 8 years, and is never going to ever date again. She's going to be single the rest of her life. And I thought, that's interesting. And I said, why are you single, and why are you going to be single for the rest of your life? And she said that 8 years before, she was really deeply in love with this guy that dumped her, broke her heart, and that was it for her. She'd sworn off relationships forever. So when I tested her, I found that she also had put up this wall around her heart, a heart wall. And so I was able to find what those were about. Actually, all three of those emotions had developed from the event 8 years before, the breakup.
mm,
And those energies were still with her. And so when I cleared the very last one of those, which probably took about, maybe 10 minutes, all of a sudden her neck pain is gone. I mean, completely gone, from a 9 on a 0 to 10 to 0. And she can't believe it. It's kind of miraculous. And I was grateful that it worked. And she left the office and didn't come back for 3 months. And 3 months later, she comes back, and I'll always remember seeing her in my hallway at my office, and I remembered her immediately because she was the first celibate person besides the occasional Catholic priest that I had met that was, celibate. And I said, "Hey, how are you? What's going on?" And she said, "My neck has been totally fine since I was here, but," she said, "you cleared that heart wall for me, and that
mm.
really works." She said, "About 2 weeks after I was here, I found out my childhood sweetheart has been living right around the corner from me for
Wow.
almost 8 years, and we're
Mm,
dating, and we're in
wow.
love." She said, "And I think he's going to ask me to marry him."
Mm,
And I
mm,
just thought, wow, what a
mm,
shift. But this is the kind of thing that happens. That's how powerful this is. And
mm,
so with the emotion code, these emotional energies can land anywhere in the body, and they can cause all kinds of symptoms. 90% of all the physical pain people have is because of emotional baggage in the body in one place or another.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Depression. I mean, I've seen suicidal depression uh, recover just literally in days from
Mm,
having the heart wall taken down.
mm,
Autistic children seem to always have a heart wall. And autistic children that will not make eye contact, when that heart wall is taken down, that's often the very first thing they do is they make eye contact, often for the first time. It's amazing. But depression, anxiety, phobias, panic attacks, PTSD, eating disorders, self-sabotage, all these things are being caused wholly or in large part by this emotional baggage.
mm.
Every disease process that we experience as human beings has an emotional component. And we also inherit emotional energy at conception, oftentimes from mom or dad. And these inherited energies may go back 10, 20 generations. And so if you had an ancestor that had some kind of a very difficult thing that they went through, which I think we all
We
have
all
that,
do.
right?
That's in that kind of intergenerational trauma that Mark Wallen talks about. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I can really resonate as you're speaking because obviously a lot of my audience, myself included, I remember the heart wall. I called it an exoskeleton. You
Mm-hmm.
know, one of the Professor Joy Chavrian, who wrote the book Boarding School Syndrome, she talks about a carapace, a wall we built up around us to
Yeah.
survive boarding school. and that you say 93% of people have done that. And I certainly remember I spent 3 years in a Buddhist monastery where I took down that wall, and it was a lot of grieving, a lot of painting. I worked with the Jungian analyst for a number of years. I felt very naked after that wall came down. It
Yeah.
was like, whoa. And gradually I got used to it. But I can really resonate with your stories there of, that child who's 9 years old, struggling with depression. And yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, I really can resonate. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about the emotion code, and in fact, we have another book coming out this fall called The Heart Code. The emotion
Mm,
code looks like this in English. Behind me on the wall, I've hung up lots of other books. It's in many languages, right? But that's
mm,
the emotion code book, and um, and we talk all about the heart wall in here. We are coming out with another book this fall called The Heart Code, because we want to reemphasize to people how how really important this is. The beauty of this is that you can learn how to do this yourself. And
mm.
so rather than having to spend, 3 years in a monastery to take this down yourself, which, kudos to you. Good on you, mate, because that was a difficult thing. But but
You're
now we have a
telling
way
me.
that we can accelerate it. And you can actually do
Right.
this.
Right. And is that in your book or is that on your courses that
It's
you can
it's
learn?
all in there. The book is the self-contained method. It teaches you everything you need to know about how to do this,
Mm,
and it's amazing how powerful it can be. Uh, One of my favorite stories is from a woman that we met at a conference, and she told us that she had started reading the emotion code, and her son started reading it, and she was listening to it on audio, and so was he. And after a while, he starts practicing with his friends, you doing muscle testing, and she thought, oh, this is really cute. But a couple of weeks go by, and she gets a phone call, and the woman that's calling identifies herself as the mother of one of her son's friends, and she says, "Listen, I need to talk with you." She said, "My son has a severe phobia of water. You can have a phobia to anything." And she said, "It's been very disruptive to his life and to our life as a family. It's been very difficult." And she said, "We've tried everything to fix this. Nothing has ever worked." But she said, "I need to talk to you because right now I'm at the community pool and my son is out playing around in the water with the other boys for the very first time in his whole life." She said, "Your son did this to him." She said, "How is this even possible? What in the world is he doing?" And those two boys are only 11 years old, see? And that's how easy this can be. And
mm,
so that's really, that's the beauty of this, is that now we have a faster way. I mean, you're a textbook example of dealing with this on your own, right? And trying to overcome all that baggage and take down that wall that's been built up around you. And I really appreciate what, all that hard work that you did. Good for you. Um, and now the higher power is showing us, hey, here's a faster way to do this. If you don't have
mm.
time to go to the monastery, if you can't take that time out of your life, you can still take down that all those emotions that are wrapped around your heart and that are in all these other areas of your body. And it's such a beautiful thing because, you know, it's interesting because what you're saying about the carapace, uh, often people will say things like, when I got rid of enough of my emotional baggage, it almost felt like I had stepped out of this old suit that I was wearing, right?
Mm,
Into
mm,
this whole new state of being that really feel is much closer to who I'm supposed to be, right? We come into this world and then we start developing all this baggage, and it's not that we become our emotional baggage, but our emotional baggage has such a powerful influence on our personalities and how we interact with other people and what we're able to do in our lives and the paths that we take and so on. And so, our trapped emotions feed into our addiction, and addictive behaviors are often the result, of course, of pain that we have gone through, and we were trying to deal with that pain. How do we? how do we deal with that? And so addiction's often the result. But the beautiful thing about the emotion code is that as we get rid of these trapped emotions, uh, the driving force behind those experiences or behind those behaviors, it's just no longer there.
Mm.
And you know, so very many times I've seen this happen where people have been through some kind of trauma. They've been abused or hurt in some way, and they can't move past it. They can't forgive. And see, I think forgiveness is the challenge that we all have ultimately. I think
Mm.
that I think that we really can't have peace in our lives, total peace really, until we've forgiven everybody and moved on. Because the Lewis Smead said um, forgiveness is like setting the prisoner free, only to find that the prisoner was you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
When we
yeah.
when we withhold, right? When we
It's like
withhold
Buddhism.
forgiveness,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, we've all had things that we've been through, and some of us have been through really, really difficult things, especially, for example, if you've been sent away to boarding school. I mean, the heartache of that, I mean, having to leave your family and then going into some environment where you may be systematically abused
Mm.
is just horrific. And
Mm.
so
Could I ask a
find it,
question there? I
yeah,
mean, so people who've been through that experience, but then they've disassociated. So therefore, to connect to their emotions full stop is really difficult. They've learnt, and that's kind of, as I mentioned before we began, so many of our leaders have disassociated.
right.
They don't feel. How do we, if we are one of those people, how do we connect to our emotions? Have you found when you've worked with people who've been through that, using the emotion code, that you can still heal?
Yeah. Well, you absolutely can. And we have many, many stories of people who who can't feel and who finally begin to feel after that emotional baggage is released. The subconscious mind knows what emotional baggage is going on and what you have. And so we bypass the conscious mind and we go straight to the subconscious mind, which has a perfect understanding of everything going on in the body. It's a computer that is really beyond our ability to comprehend. And as those emotional energies are released, then often those disparate parts can come back together because it's safe to come back together now. And one of the things also that's a little more advanced that we teach is actually working on the inner child itself, because it's possible that you can have an inner child as an adult and even have another one as a child. And so you can have these two separate parts. But that's one of the things also that we understand. And so it's if you think about it in a way, um, you can think of a trapped emotion. It's like a ball of energy from about the
Mm.
size of a baseball to about the size of a softball or a small melon. These inhabit the body. And each one of these is like a little dark cloud in a way in this energy field of the body. When you're born, for the most part, I think you are a clear, clean, pristine energy field. But then things start happening to you and you start developing this emotional baggage. And so each one of these is like a little dark cloud in the body. And you can end up um, having an energy body that is like a very dark, cloudy, stormy day.
Mm.
But as we start removing these energies, it becomes, more scattered clouds, right? And then as we keep going, eventually we get to a certain point where there isn't any more energy like that in the body. And suddenly we become capable, number one, I think, of forgiveness. It can
Mm.
be impossible to forgive somebody that has really hurt you if there's a lot of energy attached to that. But as we remove those energies, then oftentimes people find that they're able to finally forgive and finally have peace.
Mm.
And sometimes the person we need to forgive the most is us. And
Definitely.
so sometimes, you know, that's the last thing that we end up doing is for actually finally forgiving ourselves.
Mm.
But I think that you can't really have peace in your life until you've forgiven everybody. But to get there, oftentimes it's for people, it's often not possible until the energies that were created by the abuse or whatever it was, or by that person or that institution or whatever, are removed,
Mm.
and then you're able to finally move forward with your life. And you know, it's just such an interesting and such a beautiful process. And like I said in the book, you can learn how to do this yourself. We have now almost 15,000 certified practitioners around the world. If you're looking for someone to help you, you can go to discoverhealing.com, and we have a map of the earth. And but this is energy medicine. And so one of the aspects of it is that you don't have to actually go and see someone live and in person if you want help. You might find that you know, someone that really resonates with you that can also help you might be in, you know, maybe Hong Kong or Singapore or something like that, or maybe in India or Norway, you know, or Canada. Um, but you can look at the map and you can just go through that and see who resonates with you. But that's another beautiful thing about this is that um, it works at any distance really, and
Mm.
yet it can be so powerful and so life changing. So
Sounds
fun
like
stuff.
fascinating work. Thank you for sharing, so many amazing stories, and I can resonate on so many levels to the journey of moving through the emotions. And yeah, I can see how certainly that idea of the heart wall, I think as society, like you said, 93% of us, we do have these walls up. And you can almost see that with animals and with children. They can feel immediately. I live up on a farm and I go out in the field, and when I'm got my heart wall up, the sheep are a bit standoffish, but last month been grieving a lot. They've been, very friendly,
Yeah, sure.
very kind of
They're,
open-hearted too.
yeah, trying to
So
comfort you. They can
y-
sense that what you've
yeah,
been going through. Yeah,
yeah. So
it is a
it's
beautiful
interesting.
thing.
It is. So I kind of created a practice a few years ago because this idea of the wall and just opening it. So, doing visualization, having a sense of what type of wall you had in front of you, because most of my clients have that wall from boarding school. And once they visualize it, then creating a doorway in between or taking the wall down.
Mhm.
And a lot of them have found it's transformative
Yeah.
because they haven't ever let their wife inside that wall or their children inside that wall.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah,
mm,
I that's great. Well, there are probably many different ways to take down this wall.
mm,
Um, I would say probably the emotion code, um, and soon again the heart code book that's coming out. Probably the fastest way to do it, um, because we rely totally on the subconscious mind,
mm,
and we simply ask, "Can we remove an emotion from this wall now?" And so usually we're able to take the wall down in within about 3 sessions, and that's releasing maybe 8 to 10 emotions per session. Some people have a heart wall that's just made of one emotion,
mm.
and sometimes it's multiple layers. Um, but it's interesting. You know, you mentioned animals, and one of the really fun things about the emotion code is that it also works on animals. They also develop emotional baggage, and
Mm.
that baggage will manifest as behavioral problems or some kind of a physical issue with animals, lameness in horses, and uh, all kinds of things with dogs and cats and so on. We've seen all kinds of amazing stories. We might have to do another show just about animals.
You're welcome to come back. I have a busy few weeks, and then, yeah, I'm gonna get back onto my podcast again in probably 2, 4 weeks. But yeah, it'd be lovely to have you back on. I realize we're coming up for about an hour, so
Yeah.
The hour's gone quite quickly. So, how do people find out more about the emotion code? Is it just go to your website? I'll put the website into the description, discoverhealing.com. Where's the best place to either learn?
Yeah. Well, our we have two websites really. Our main website for our business is discoverhealing.com.
Yeah.
And so you can go there and you can watch videos and things. They were all over YouTube. We've got practitioners all over TikTok and so on. Um, and then my personal blog is at drbradleynelson.com. That's drbradleynelson.com. And you can find out more about my spiritual beliefs there and more kind of about my, some of my personal things. But yeah, discoverhealing.com is the site. And of course, you can get the Emotion Code book on Amazon. I don't know if you have Barnes and Noble in the UK.
No, no, we don't.
No,
I've
but
not seen it. We might do, but
just about wherever books are sold, you should be able to find a copy of the Emotion Code. It's also available on Audible.
mm,
So if you like to listen to books, it's there. Um, you've heard of Tony Robbins, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, of
Tony
course.
wrote the foreword for the book, and
Wow.
so we were really really appreciative of that. And we've got some great endorsements from a lot of some really amazing people like Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden and um, uh, people like that are kind of into this sort of thing. I mean, Einstein uh, many years ago said the medicine of the future will be the medicine of frequencies.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think when he said that, probably nobody had any idea what he was talking about except just his closest friends. And also, Nikola Tesla said something. He said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And so, really, that's really what this is all about. It's about communicating with this internal computer, and that might sound difficult, but it's actually not hard at all. And we teach you the whole process in the emotion code. So uh,
mm,
you can learn how to do this. It's easy enough. Kids can do it. So,
Well, thank you for the lovely conversation and for the work. And one last thought for my audience. What would you like to share just to wrap up?
well, I think what I would like to share is that you've probably been dragging around through life a lot of emotional baggage, and you can think of it as being like steamer trunks and suitcases that you've been hauling through life while wondering why life isn't easier, maybe, um, and why it's so hard to create the life that you want or to feel the way that you'd rather feel. And the emotion code now is just a really simple, really easy way to come along and just cut those ropes, cut those chains that are holding you to all that baggage. You can think of yourself as being like a hot air balloon, okay, that's tethered to the ground and that has lots of sandbags hanging off of the gondola, and they're keeping you anchored to the lower vibrations, the lower frequencies of the earth. And the emotion code is a way to systematically cut loose all those sandbags and cut loose those mooring lines that are holding you to the earth so that you can begin to ascend vibrationally and begin to feel the emotions that are on those higher levels. Love and joy, forgiveness lies along that ascension path. And, um, and that's really what this is about. My message is that there now is a way that is it's a breakthrough method that's just remarkably simple and easy. You can learn to do it on yourself. You don't have to have anyone help you. Um, you can learn to do it on others. Uh, if you choose, you can go through certification and become a certified practitioner, which is a great way to actually have rails to run on to really learn it well. And then you can actually, if you want, you can have clients and help them. And it's interesting because it's kind of a natural path for a lot of people that they get the help and then they naturally want to help others. And
mm,
so I guess that's my message really, is that there is this method now in the world that is simple and easy that you can learn. Uh, or if you don't want to learn it, that's okay. You can have someone else do it for you. Go to discoverhealing.com and find a practitioner, and then let your life start changing, because you the past does not have to be the future for you. So
Mm, bless you. Bless you. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your work. And if I can support your work in any way, please do let me know.
thank you, Piers. Thanks so much for your time here. Really appreciate it.
Mm, cool. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.